What is up, everybody? This is your boy Mark, and I'm here for another podcast today. Back with my homie. We got Steven on set again.
Hey.
So Steven and I, we have a lot of experience living in East Asian countries. So not just Korea, but we've also lived in Japan and China as well. Steven, how long have you lived in Korea now?
So this will be my second year, so not nearly as long as you.
Yeah. I've been here a total of 6.5 since July 2014. I've been here that long, and it doesn't feel like that long. Time really does fly. You lived in Japan too?
I lived in Japan, I lived in China, and I lived in Taiwan as well.
How long did you live in Japan?
Only half a year. So, because I was there studying abroad. So I lived in China for 7 months. I lived in Japan for 6, and then I lived in Taiwan for a year.
In one word, how would you describe just living in those countries?
Amazing, like life-changing. Like, of course, like I wouldn't trade it for the world. Like, I feel like I really grew up as a person because I went over for the first time when I was 19 to China by myself to do an internship. And that was a rough experience, but I feel like I grew so much as a person to understand myself and the world around me because of that experience. So wouldn't trade it for anything, never.
You know, before we really continue with talking about this topic, just gotta say, one, we're not really comparing Japan, Korea, and China.
No.
Even though they're close to each other geographically, they're completely different culturally. Some of the people may look similar just because they are close to each other geographically, but overall, they're just 3 different countries.
Yeah.
So before there's a war in the comments, just know that we're not comparing them. We're not saying which one's worse. We're not saying which one's better. It's just more, we're just kind of talking about our time and living in these, right?
Don't come for us.
Don't come for us. So you lived here almost for the longest time.
Lived here longest out of all the countries that I've stayed in, yes.
But your language skills, so this man is a linguist. Language-wise, you're very strong at one of them, extremely strong. Like extremely strong at one. Which one?
Mandarin, I would say.
And why are you so good at Mandarin?
I don't know, it's a work in progress, but I majored in it in college. I think the thing that actually really helped me was that there wasn't many people that majored in it in college. So actually there was only me in the classroom. It got to the point where I did independent studies with my teacher, and we would just sit in the class for 2 hours and just speak Mandarin. And I had summer classes, and I'd just speak Mandarin with her for 2 hours and just talk, and I just listened to her. And then I had friends in China when I went there. I had only Chinese friends, basically, mostly, and I would just hang out with them, and we'd only speak Chinese throughout the whole time. And I was exhausted every time, but I think exposure, the more you are exposed to a language, I think the better you are going to become at that.
Yeah, that makes so much sense.
Yeah. If you feel like you're struggling, exposure might be what you're missing. Actually having a realistic context to actually use that language in instead of just a textbook or watching a video and repeating it. You know what I mean? You're actually missing conversation and being able to talk to someone.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
And you know, having that conversation is a very, very, very key component to actually getting a language. Because I know while living in Japan, so I lived there from 2007 to 2008 as a college student, right? And for me, it was like every day Japanese class was 3 hours straight. And then after that, we'd leave and go to like have conversation. And I feel like I didn't do as well as I should have. And like my Japanese got pretty strong, but like I feel like I was slacking. So I was slacking hard, man, when I was in college because, you know, I didn't utilize that time to speak to people. And I think it's this sense of like insecurity, right? And like being vulnerable, right? With language, because it's like you can't do it well in the beginning. And so you have to make mistakes. But through making mistakes, you are going to get great at it. But you have to make a lot of mistakes, right?
I think it's also having the right kind of friends. Because people might penalize you for making mistakes. I had different friends in China. I mean, some friends were just brutal. You know what I mean? If you made a mistake in Chinese, they would laugh at you or they'd make fun of you or they just wouldn't. Like I had a friend, well, she wasn't really my friend, but I joined this language exchange and she said, she used this like slang from Beijing, or not really Beijing, North China, where for people that speak Chinese out there, the word for what in Chinese is 什么, but sometimes people in the north, they say 啥 instead. And so instead of saying 你叫什么名字 to me, what is your name, she said 你叫啥. And I was just starting to learn Chinese, so I was like, what on earth did you say to me? I have no idea what you said. And then she goes, why is your Chinese so awful? And then she just walked away. She yelled it at me and she just walked away. And I felt so humiliated because it was in front of a ton of people in the language exchange and everyone was awkward and silent.
Wow,
it was really so embarrassing, especially when you're starting to learn a language. It just was crushing. But then I had friends who were very encouraging and very uplifting. So it's really all about the people too that you meet.
Let's say when you first meet them, you're not that good at that language, so then they speak to you in English, right? And then like as you go further along, then they'll be like, oh, okay, his language is getting better. Let me switch to Korean. Let me switch to Mandarin. Let me switch to Japanese, right? And they kind of challenge you versus like some, they just kind of stick with that. And so they're like, even if you try to speak to them in like their language, they'll always respond back to you in English. And you're like,
There's also, I encourage people who are learning a language, if you're meeting new friends and you want to practice your language skills with those people, you need to, as soon as you become acquainted with them, just start speaking the target language, that language you want to learn with that person. Because if you establish your language of relationship, of communication within English, it will stay in English. Because that's how you formed your relationship. And it's so hard.
It's so hard to change it, because even now I can think of a few relationships where like I'm trying to speak to them in Korean, but they will consistently only speak to me in English. Really, it depends on who they are surrounded by as well, or who they had to speak English with. Because now, living in Korea, there's so many foreigners here who don't speak a lick of Korean. And so typically when they're used to speaking to foreigners who don't speak Korean, then they get used to speaking only English to foreigners. And not just, even foreigners who are really good. Like I think in order to change somebody who's like that, you have to speak their native level for them to be like, oh, well, there's no point in me even speaking English, right? Because then you have someone who's near native Korean speaking to you. So then like, is there anything you find within all three countries that was like difficult? Some things that or maybe some things within all three that you found like, oh, this was awesome. This was awesome.
The one that was most difficult for me, and I know other people will disagree with me, but at least for me as a ENFP extrovert, for those who know the Myers-Briggs, I'm an ENFP.
Stop looking at them. Look at me.
Am I not supposed to? No, I thought I could look at the camera sometimes.
You can look at them sometimes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I won't look at you anymore. Okay, I'm sorry. Anyway. But I can't help it. Anyway. So anyway. You're just so irresistible.
Keep going. Keep going.
I think as someone who's extremely extroverted, I found living in Japan at first, integrating into Japanese society was extremely difficult. Oh my gosh, it just was so hard. And this isn't a criticism, it's just showing how it's different from who I am as a person. And maybe other people who have integrated into maybe American society, or people who are foreigners to America, and they found it difficult because it was different. Well, that's how I felt. I just struggled so much with trying to understand Japanese culture and Japanese expected behavior of how you hold yourself.
It's tough. Like I feel like at the age of 34, when I think back to Japan, it's like I think like happy thoughts, but then when I really think back to that moment, there were times where I was just really frustrated. It's almost like I either try to get friends to do something, or I want to go do something, I want to invite them, and like typically you suggest something, and then like a Japanese friend might be like, yeah, but like in their head they're like, no. And so like you're like, what? And they kind of like give you this type of lip service because they don't want to embarrass you, and that's just part of the culture and saving face, right? It's like they don't want to embarrass you. I found that at certain times it was hard to make genuine friends. Like genuine friends. Right? And I think again, it's not a criticism of the culture. It's just more of like within my time there, it's something that I had difficulty with. Right? But I would say like in coming to Korea, I found it easier to make Korean friends because I went to a Korean church for many years in high school, or then after college. I kind of understood Korean culture a little bit more. And so I was a little bit more, not open, but I could adapt to it fairly quicker than many other foreign people. Not to mention, I also picked up Korean a little bit faster. Well, faster. I'm still not fluent. It's been 6.5 years. For me as well, it's been kind of like, I've had some good things in some countries, but I also had some struggles. I had struggles in all three, actually.
Well, they all have their different, they'll pose their different obstacles. Like, I mean, and just to briefly mention with Japan, it was like, that the societal part of it was difficult for me initially, but I feel like Japan really challenged me to adapt. Like, I felt like I could get away with things when I was in Korea or like in China. I could get away with being an aloof foreigner, you know what I mean? Just like, oh, I'm a foreigner, I'll just BS it and fly under the radar, you know what I mean? But like, I felt like Japan, if I really wanted to make friends there, if I really wanted to get close with Japanese people, I had to behave accordingly to Japanese culture if I was going to actually do that. And I used to be that person that everyone would stare at on the subway. You know, they give that eye to, that glare, you know, that glare that they have. Oh, the glare. Oh, when you come to East Asia, if you haven't been, especially Japan and Korea, they have this glare that they'll give you and they'll just be like, basically, right? It's like, stop, you know, just stop. I used to get that every time I came on the subway because you can imagine, I was so loud and obnoxious.
I got that on a plane once.
Oh, you on the plane?
On a plane. I was coming from Korea. I've never been shushed on a plane by Koreans. I remember I was shushed. I think she was Japanese, but like, we were on the landing strip, and then like, I'm just talking to someone just at this volume here, just regular at this volume, and then this lady like looks over and she's just like, shh, like this. It's like, I'm literally talking the lowest possible, and then I was talking to this other American girl. We just kept talking, but we're not like talking like this, but we were just talking like this. She basically complained to the flight attendant that we were talking. And so at that point, like, this was probably like year 2 for me. So I could have easily spoke Japanese back and then be like, no, we're not loud. We're just fine. Like, but then the flight attendant came over. She was like, excuse me, but just for the time being, would you mind not talking? Just because we're taxiing. That was the first time that I ever was told that we were supposed to be quiet when we taxi.
No talking on a plane at all?
I've never experienced that in my life.
Never heard of such.
I think this was JAL. This is JAL.
Oh my God. I've never heard of such a thing. No talking at all?
No talking at all.
What the?
Ridiculous, right?
I kind of had a hard time with becoming more reserved in my nature initially when I first met people, being quieter. But then eventually, after I spent time in Japan, I became part of the crowd that stared at the loud people on the train. Yeah. I would sit with everyone else and go, you know what I mean? Like when the loud foreigner came on the train, I would stare at them too with the Japanese people.
I'm trying to think, what is that one term in Japan where it's called like, where it's basically like the nail that sticks out gets hammered?
Yeah, okay. I don't know that saying, but...
Yeah, it's basically like, well, it's self-explanatory, right? If you like stick out, then the society's gonna push you back in.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm so with you because I know I've done it too. But then some people come on just like, Rah! Just being loud, even in Korea, just, and you're just like, bruh.
And that's how it is in these collectivist societies.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? When it's collectivist, it's I think for people who come from individualistic societies, they have a really hard time adjusting to that. Once I got used to that, I cried so much when I left Japan. It was awful. I loved Japan after I got used to it. I loved it. I loved the food. I loved the transportation. I loved my friends. I made Japanese friends, and they're like gold to me. Like whenever I come to Japan, they bring me to their house. They want me to sleep over. They cook food for me. They take me around. Like, they're just so good to me. And they're some of my really good friends now that even if I don't contact them for a couple months, if I contact them, we just get right back to where we left off.
Just talking. Yeah. The only struggle I've had in Korea, and this is excluding, because this is a topic for another day, excluding like relationship stuff, I would say has been, I don't really know, to be honest with you. Like, I know that there have been issues, like instances where like, I think it's just being culturally aware. I find it, not all Koreans obviously, but like you have your select Koreans that they say something or do something that makes this really awkward, and it makes everybody feel out of place and can really sour someone's viewpoint of the country. I've been around some of those Koreans before, and that has like, luckily for me, I try to be positive, look on the bright side of things and everything, but like that has been some of like the only for me. As far as like, but everything else has been great. I love living in Korea. I love traveling through Korea. I love driving in Korea at certain times. I kind of gotten used to it in driving Korea. So like I don't get as angry as I used to when I was like before when I first started. But yeah, I would say overall, I enjoy living here?
I would say pretty much the same. I think one struggle would be that it's hard because when you're not gender conforming or you're not cisgendered, it might be a little bit difficult. Or if you're a part of LGBTQ plus community, like fitting in.
Whole new perspective, right?
That's a whole new thing.
A whole new thing.
That's a whole nother rabbit hole to go down. But anyway, that can make it difficult. Outside of that, actually, I find that, I think this is from a perspective of being white. But I think for white people, it's easier to make friends and it's easier to be accepted in terms of their skin color by society and for Korean people to be curious about you and be interested in you because there's the aspect of they associate me and how I look as a Westerner, you know what I mean? And they can be curious about that.
Yeah.
But so I think socially wise though, outside of sexuality and gender identity, I think I've actually had a great time.
Yeah. Anything you want to say about China?
China, I would say, China was kind of like my first one, so it was kind of like my first love for being abroad. So I learned a lot in China. I learned a lot about, they have this thing where Chinese people, where you don't go directly at an issue. You go around the issue. You know what I mean? You go around it, you talk around something. And it took me a while to learn how to navigate that. So that was difficult sometimes when I was working in China as a 19-year-old in the office, or even just when I had an issue with a Chinese friend, or in my college or university where I went to in China. China is such a diverse country because it's so huge. I mean, there's.
So I feel like then we can recommend all 3 countries to people.
Yes, of course.
Okay. I would say one of these 3 countries, but why go to one country? We can go all 3. So whenever Miss Rona has left and we can travel freely, make sure you come on over, come check them out, and come figure out which one is the one for you. Stephen, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, loved having you today. And also thank you guys for checking out the video. Guys, make sure you smash that like button, as well as if you're digging these videos, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We got some more podcasts coming out. I'm loving these podcasts. These are fun to do. It's good for you to get to know us a little bit more. But with that being said, you guys make sure you be cool. Peace.